cornered by a man no one dared to challenge. She thought this was just another dark day in her life. He laughed, certain of his power, certain that silence meant permission. But across the room sat a quiet stranger, a man shaped by war, and a dog who sensed danger before it spoke. What happened next wasn't violence. It was something closer to a miracle. This is the story of a waitress, a Navy SEAL who never revealed who he was, and a loyal dog who stood between evil and the innocent. If you're watching right now, tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and hope. Morning came slowly to the north. Not the dramatic kind, no sudden blaze of color or triumphant sunrise, but a gradual softening of the dark, as if the night itself were tired and willing to step aside. Pale light filtered through the bare branches surrounding the small cabin by the lake, glinting off a thin crust of snow that had fallen some time before dawn. Inside the cabin, Caleb Maddox was already awake. He always was. At 35, Caleb stood just over 6 feet tall, his frame lean and compact, built for endurance rather than display. There was nothing bulky or theatrical about him. His strength lived deeper, in tendons and reflexes, trained long before muscle ever became a consideration. His face was clean-shaven, the skin pale but weathered by northern winds. A square jaw and pronounced cheekbones gave him a permanent look of restraint, as if emotion had been carefully measured and locked behind bone. His hair dark brown, cut short in a military style, grown just slightly past regulation, sat neatly, even after sleep. Discipline, once learned deeply enough, never fully left. Caleb moved through the cabin with quiet efficiency, boots never scuffing the floor, shoulders automatically angling to avoid knocking into furniture. He poured black coffee into a chipped mug and stood by the window, watching the lake. The lake was frozen solid now, a vast, unbroken sheet of white stretching toward the tree line, reflecting the early light like polished stone. It looked peaceful, harmless. Caleb knew better than to trust surfaces. Behind him, a low sound stirred the room, a soft exhale, followed by the faint scrape of claws against wood. Rook lifted his head. The German shepherd was 5 years old, large and powerfully built, his coat a deep mix of black and gold that darkened along his back like a shadow laid by a god. His ears rose sharply, alert but not aggressive. His eyes, amber and steady, tracked Caleb without urgency, as if checking that the world was still in its proper order. Rook did not bark. He rarely did. Instead, he rose and moved to Caleb's side, positioning himself slightly ahead of him, facing the window. It was a habit, one Caleb never taught him, but never tried to correct either. Wherever Caleb stood still for too long, Rook placed himself between Caleb and the unknown. "Easy," Caleb murmured, not looking down. Rook's tail swayed once, slow and deliberate. Caleb sipped his coffee and let the quiet settle. This was the life he'd chosen after leaving the Navy SEALs. A small town in northern Minnesota. A cabin far enough from others to breathe, close enough to town to be human when needed. Repair work in winter. Boats in summer. No medals on the wall. No flags. Just routine. Routine was how you stayed alive. The phone buzzed against the counter. Caleb didn't flinch, but Rook's ears flicked instantly toward the sound. The name on the screen made Caleb pause. Evan Mercer. Caleb hadn't seen Evan in almost 2 years. Not since a rushed coffee in Chicago, both of them standing instead of sitting, like men who didn't quite trust rest anymore. Caleb answered. "Did I wake you?" Evan's voice asked. It carried the familiar mix of sharpness and restraint polished now, but forged somewhere rougher. "No," Caleb said. "What's up?" A brief silence. Evan always did that, a half-second pause, as if checking his surroundings even through a phone. "I'm in town," Evan said. "Thought we could catch up. There's a bar near the Lake Warm place. Decent beer." Caleb glanced at the window again, at the frozen expanse outside. "When?" he asked. "Tonight." Rook shifted his weight. Caleb noticed. "Sure," Caleb said. "Send the address." The call ended. Caleb stood still for a moment longer than necessary. Evan had been different even back in the teams. Not stronger, not faster, but he noticed patterns. Numbers, movements, others ignored. Where Caleb read terrain, Evan read people. That kind of mind didn't end up in quiet towns without reason. By evening, the sky had cleared into a sharp, endless blue. The town came alive in small ways lights in windows, trucks crunching over snow-packed roads, breath fogging the air as people hurried indoors. Caleb drove with Rook in the back seat, the dog sitting upright, eyes forward. Halfway into town, Rook let out a low sound. Not a growl, not quite a warning, but something in between. Caleb checked the rearview mirror. A dark SUV slowed as he slowed, turned when he turned. Probably nothing. Probably. The bar sat near the edge of town, its windows glowing amber against the cold. Inside, the air smelled of wood, citrus cleaner, and something fried. Music hummed low. Country blues played softly enough to be ignored. Evan stood near the bar, tall and neatly dressed in a dark coat and wool sweater. He looked out of place in the way professionals often did, too clean, too alert. His hair was trimmed carefully, his face smooth, eyes sharp behind a tired smile. "Damn," Evan said when he saw Caleb. "You look solid." "You look expensive," Caleb replied. They clasped forearms, the old way. Evan's grip was firm but restrained. Not a fighter anymore, a thinker. They sat, ordered beer, and that was when Caleb noticed her. The waitress moved quickly between tables, balancing plates with practiced ease. She was in her mid-20s, slim, her brown hair pulled into a neat ponytail. Her uniform was simple black shirt, dark apron, but there was a carefulness to her movements, as if she were always bracing for something unseen. Her name tag read Hannah. She smiled when she spoke, but her eyes were tired. "Rough day?" Evan murmured after she walked away. Caleb nodded once, but his attention had shifted. At the far end of the bar sat a man in a black bomber jacket, his posture loose in the way men get when they believe nothing in the room can touch them. His hair was cut sharp on the sides, his jaw thick, his eyes restless. He leaned too close to Hannah when she returned, his hand drifting where it didn't belong. Hannah stiffened. No one else moved. Caleb felt Rook tense beneath the table. The dog's head rose slowly, eyes locking onto the man. His body went still, too still. Predatory awareness sharpened into focus. Caleb set his glass down. He stood. "Hey," Caleb said calmly, stepping between Hannah and the man. "She's working." The man looked up, surprised more than angry. Then his mouth curled into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You got a problem?" he asked. Caleb met his gaze, steady and unblinking. "No," he said. "You do." The bar went quiet. Hannah stepped back, breath shallow. The man laughed once, sharp and ugly. "You don't know who I am?" Caleb didn't answer. Behind him, Rook rose silently, positioning himself just ahead of Caleb's legs, his presence unmistakable. The man's eyes flicked to the dog. Something changed. Not fear. Calculation. At that exact moment, Rook did something he had never done before. He turned his head, not toward the man in front of them, but toward the bar's entrance. His ears flattened. His tail went rigid. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward and blocked the aisle completely. His body angled not to attack, but to guard. Caleb followed Rook's gaze. The dark SUV from earlier sat idling outside, engine running, headlights off, waiting. Caleb exhaled slowly. Whatever this was, it hadn't started tonight, and it wasn't ending here. The bar never truly returned to its noise. Laughter crept back in cautiously, like an animal testing open ground after a storm. Glasses clinked again. Someone fed $1 into the jukebox. But the room carried a thin fracture now, an awareness that something had almost happened and might still. Caleb Maddox remained standing for a moment after the confrontation ended. The man in the bomber jacket, Vince, as someone had muttered under their breath, had backed away with a grin too practiced to be harmless. His friends followed, all swagger and muttered threats, slipping out the side door into the cold. No blows were thrown, no chairs overturned. That made it worse. Caleb sat down slowly, the muscles in his shoulders still tight. His heart rate was steady, controlled, but his mind was already cataloging exits, faces, angles. Old habits didn't fade. They just learned to wear civilian clothes. Across the table, Evan watched him with a look that mixed admiration and concern. "You didn't have to do that," Evan said quietly. "Yes, I did," Caleb replied. Under the table, Rook stayed standing. The German shepherd's body was rigid, ears still forward, eyes fixed on the door long after it had closed. His breathing was slow, measured, but his tail did not move. Caleb reached down and rested 2 fingers lightly against the dog's shoulder. "Stand down," he murmured. Rook did not relax immediately. Only after several long seconds did he lower himself back to the floor, though his head remained lifted, watching. Hannah returned to their table with their drinks, hands steady through obvious effort. Up close, Caleb could see the faint redness on her wrist where fingers had pressed too hard. "Thanks," she said, voice polite, distant, professional. Evan glanced at her, then back at Caleb, silently asking a question. Caleb nodded once. Hannah hesitated, then surprised both men by speaking again. "He comes in sometimes," she said softly. "Usually late, usually when the owner isn't around." She was average height, slim, without being fragile, her posture tight, as if she expected to be corrected at any moment. Her brown hair was pulled back so firmly it tugged at her temples. Her skin was pale under the bar lights, with the faint shadow of exhaustion beneath her eyes. Tonight was worse, she added. He doesn't like being told no. Caleb met her gaze. Does he know where you live? Hannah swallowed. I think he thinks he does, she said. That answer stayed with Caleb longer than the words themselves. She moved away to another table. Evan leaned back, exhaling through his nose. That guy's trouble, Evan said. Not just muscle. He's careless in a way that only protected men get to be. Caleb nodded. He's connected. Evan's jaw tightened. Yeah. They finished their beers without another incident. Outside, the air had sharpened, the kind of cold that bit cleanly and lingered. The parking lot was nearly empty now, frost beginning to lace the windshields. Caleb unlocked his truck. Rook jumped into the back seat without prompting, turning in a tight circle before sitting upright. Evan paused beside the door, looking out toward the road. You ever get the feeling, Evan said, that you just stepped on a line you didn't see? All the time, Caleb replied. The trick is noticing before it pulls back. Evan smiled thinly. That's still you, always watching. They parted ways with a brief clasp of hands. Evan headed toward his hotel. Caleb pulled onto the road, tires crunching over ice. He didn't make it a mile before Rook shifted. The dog leaned forward, nose lifting, ears angling to the left. Caleb slowed. In the side mirror, headlights appeared dim, distant, then closer. The dark SUV. It stayed back, not crowding him, matching his speed too precisely to be coincidence. Caleb didn't accelerate, didn't brake suddenly. He turned down a side road instead. The SUV followed. Caleb exhaled through his teeth. So it had begun. He took 2 more turns, random, inefficient, the kind civilians used when lost. The SUV stayed with him. At the next intersection, Caleb turned sharply into a gas station, rolling beneath bright fluorescent lights. He parked near the pumps and cut the engine. The SUV slowed as if to follow, then kept going. Caleb waited until it vanished down the road before starting the truck again. Rook finally relaxed, tail giving one slow sweep. Yeah, Caleb said quietly. Thought so. By the time he reached the cabin, the lake was glowing faintly under moonlight. He parked, killed the engine, and stood listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No engines. Still. He didn't enter right away. He walked the perimeter instead, boots crunching softly in the snow. Rook moved ahead of him, nose down, checking the ground, the air, the trees. Everything looked untouched. Inside, Caleb locked the door, then leaned back against it, eyes closed for half a second longer than necessary. This was the part civilians never saw, the waiting after. The mental replay, the quiet calculation of risk. Rook padded over and sat directly in front of him, close enough that Caleb could feel the dog's warmth through his jeans. You felt it too, Caleb said. Rook's ears flicked once. Sleep came late. When it did, it was shallow. Morning brought pale sun and brittle cold. Caleb was halfway through his second cup of coffee when his phone rang again. Evan. That guy from last night, Evan said without preamble. I saw him again. Caleb straightened. Where? Downtown. He wasn't subtle, loud, throwing cash around. Evan paused. And here's the thing. I recognized him from my work. Caleb didn't interrupt. He's not just some thug, Evan continued. He shows up in transaction records, shell companies, off-the-books payouts. He's tied to Dominic Vasallo. Caleb knew the name. Everyone in 3 counties did. Careful, Caleb said. I am, Evan replied. But listen, people like that don't like loose ends. And last night, you made yourself memorable. Caleb glanced down at Rook, who had risen again and was staring at the front window. What are you thinking? Caleb asked. That I didn't come to town just to drink beer, Evan said, and neither did he. They ended the call without ceremony. Caleb moved to the window. Across the lake, a single figure stood on the ice. Far away, almost indistinct. Too far to make out features, but close enough to be intentional. The figure didn't move. Neither did Rook. Rook suddenly lowered his head and pressed it against Caleb's leg hard. Not fear, not aggression, warning. Caleb felt it then, not danger rushing in, but something slower. A mark being placed. Someone, somewhere, had decided Caleb Maddox was no longer invisible. By afternoon, the cabin had been watched twice more. Once by a truck that slowed too much on the road, once by footsteps near the tree line that stopped when Rook growled low and unmistakable. Caleb didn't call the police. Not yet. Instead, he did what he'd been trained to do. He prepared. He moved valuables out of sight, checked locks, tested lights, charged his phone, texted Evan a single word, careful. Then he drove into town. Hannah was working again, her movements brisk, her smile thinner today. Caleb waited until her shift ended. Walk you out, he said, not asking. She hesitated, then nodded. Outside, she pulled her coat tight, breath fogging. He came by earlier, she said. Didn't touch me, just smiled. Caleb's jaw tightened. He wants you scared, Caleb said. Not broken, not yet. She looked at him, eyes bright, with held-back tears. You shouldn't have stepped in, she said. Caleb shook his head. Some lines don't wash away, he said. Once you see them crossed. They reached her car. She unlocked it quickly, climbed in, and paused. Be careful, she said. He doesn't forget faces. Caleb watched her drive away before turning back toward his truck. Rook stood beside him, eyes on the road. Whatever was coming, it was already in motion, and this time it wasn't going to stop at the bar. The first thing Caleb Maddox did the next morning was change his routine, not because he panicked, because panic wasted energy. He woke before dawn, as usual, but instead of coffee by the window, he pulled on his jacket and stepped outside with Rook at his heel. The cold bit harder today, sharp, clean, unforgiving. Snow squeaked under his boots, the sound too loud in the stillness. Rook moved ahead, nose low, tracing invisible lines across the yard. The German Shepherd's black and gold coat stood out starkly against the white ground, every muscle beneath it fluid and controlled. 5 years old, in his prime, Rook carried himself like something carved rather than born. No wasted motion, no unnecessary noise. Caleb trusted that more than his own eyes. Near the edge of the tree line, Rook stopped. He sniffed once, then again. Caleb crouched, gloved fingers brushing the snow. Their boot prints, fresh, not from the night before. Someone had come close, not close enough to be seen, close enough to be counted. Not sloppy, Caleb murmured, just curious. Rook huffed softly, a breath through his nose, displeased. Caleb straightened and scanned the frozen lake. Sunlight crept over the far trees, turning the ice pale gold. Peaceful. Deceptive. By the time he finished checking the cabin and drove into town, he'd already made his decision. He wasn't running. The diner on Main Street smelled like bacon grease and burnt toast. The kind of place that never changed because no one wanted it to. Caleb sat in a corner booth, back to the wall, Rook lying at his feet. A woman approached with a coffee pot. She was in her late 30s or early 40s, medium height, shoulders squared like someone used to bracing against things. Her blonde hair was cut just past her jaw. Practical, no nonsense. Her face held lines that spoke of long shifts and longer patience. Her blue eyes sharp, but not unkind. "Refill?" she asked. "Please," Caleb said. She poured, then paused, glancing down at Rook. "He yours?" "Yes, ma'am." "Well trained," she said. "Doesn't look around unless there's a reason." Caleb met her gaze. "That obvious?" She smiled faintly. "Name's Mara Sloan." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Detective," she added, tapping the badge clipped discreetly to her belt. No uniform, no drama. That explained the eyes. Caleb nodded once. "Caleb." She slid into the booth opposite him without asking. That, too, told him enough. "I heard about last night," Mara said. "Bar near the lake. Argument, no charges." "No crimes," Caleb replied. "Not yet," she said evenly. Rook lifted his head, studying her. Mara noticed, but didn't flinch. "I'm not here to make trouble," she said. "I'm here because trouble tends to announce itself before it arrives." Caleb said nothing. "Guy named Vince Calder," Mara continued. "He's been circling this town for a while. Small stuff. Intimidation. Nobody wants to be first to complain. Until someone stands up," Caleb said. Mara's lips curved slightly. "Exactly." She glanced down at Rook again. "And then there's you," she added. "You and your dog." Caleb took a slow sip of coffee. "I'm not looking to make a report," he said, "but I won't ignore what I see." Mara studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough," she said. "Just don't mistake silence for absence. We see more than people think." She stood, dropped a few bills on the table for the coffee, and walked out without another word. Rook watched her go. "She's honest," Caleb said quietly. Rook's tail tapped once. That afternoon, Caleb met Evan Mercer at a small office Evan had rented above a tax consultancy neutral ground, Evan had called it. Evan looked more tired today, dark circles beneath his eyes, jaw set tight. "I dug deeper," Evan said, pacing the narrow room. "Vince isn't just muscle. He's skimming. Not millions, but enough to matter." "From Dominic Vassallo," Caleb said. Evan nodded. "From Dominic's people. That's the dangerous part." Evan stopped pacing and faced Caleb. "I don't think Vince knows I know," Evan continued, "but I think he suspects someone does." Caleb leaned back in the chair. "He followed me last night." Evan exhaled sharply. "That fast?" "Fast enough." They stood in silence for a moment. Outside, a truck passed, tires hissing on packed snow. "I want you to leave town," Evan said finally. "At least for a bit." Caleb shook his head. "I won't," he said, "and neither should you. Running gives him confidence." Evan hesitated. "Cal." "I've handled worse," Caleb said, "but we do this smart." Evan's eyes flicked to Rook, lying calmly by the door. "I'm starting to believe that dog sees things before they happen." Evan said. Caleb almost smiled. That evening, Caleb returned to the bar. Not for beer, but for eyes. The place was quieter tonight. Fewer regulars. A tension hung in the air like static. Hannah was behind the counter again. Her movements were quick, efficient, but her shoulders were tight, her smile thinner than before. Caleb took a seat near the end. Rook lay down beside him, alert. Hannah noticed him almost immediately. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly when she passed. "I'm not staying long," Caleb replied. "Just making sure you're okay." She swallowed. "He came earlier," she said. "Didn't touch me. Just stood there, smiled." "Did he say anything?" "No," she said. "That's what scared me." Caleb nodded. Fear didn't come from shouting. It came from certainty. When Hannah stepped away, Gus Rourke, the bar owner, appeared behind the counter. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, thinning hair slicked back, his shirt sleeves rolled up like armor he no longer trusted. His eyes darted too often toward the door. "You stirring things up again?" Gus muttered. Caleb met his gaze. "I'm not the one crossing lines." Gus scoffed. "You don't know what lines are around here." Caleb leaned forward slightly. "I know when someone's afraid," he said, "and I know when someone's being hunted." Gus's mouth tightened. He looked away. "Just keep your head down," Gus said. "That's how people survive." Caleb watched him retreat. Survival, he thought, was a low bar. Rook suddenly stood. No growl, no sound, just a shift-sharp absolute. His eyes locked onto the far mirror behind the bar. Caleb followed his gaze. In the reflection, for just a fraction of a second, a man stood near the door. Phone raised, camera pointed. The man lowered it instantly when their eyes met, and smiled. The man was gone by the time Caleb reached the door. Outside, the street was empty. Snow drifted lazily under the streetlights, but the message had landed. Caleb returned inside, paid his tab, and left without another word. Back at the cabin, darkness settled early. Caleb checked the locks, the windows, the generator, routine, control. Rook paced the living room, restless now. "They're getting bolder," Caleb said. Rook stopped and looked at him. Caleb knelt and rested his forehead briefly against the dog's. "We don't escalate," Caleb said quietly. "Not yet." Later that night, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You should have stayed quiet." Caleb stared at the screen. Then he deleted the message. Outside, the wind rose over the lake, rattling the trees like dry bones. Caleb stood by the window, Rook at his side. Somewhere out there, someone believed fear was enough. They were about to learn the difference between being loud and being watched. The pressure didn't arrive all at once. It accumulated, like snow on a roof that looked sturdy until it wasn't. Caleb Maddox learned that on the fourth morning after the bar incident, when he stepped outside with Rook and noticed the mailbox hanging open. Nothing inside. No note. No trash. Just open. Caleb stared at it for a long second, then closed it gently, as if roughness might teach someone watching the wrong lesson. He scanned the road, empty. Pines stood still in the cold, their shadows long and quiet. Rook circled the yard once, nose down, then stopped near the gravel drive. His ears angled forward, then to the side. He looked back at Caleb, amber eyes steady. "Yeah," Caleb murmured. "They're testing." Back inside, He packed a small go bag not to run, but to be ready. Extra phone battery, gloves, paper copies of documents, the kind of things you didn't need until you did. His phone buzzed. Evan. They froze an account, Evan said, without greeting. His voice was tight. Not mine. One connected to Vince. Someone upstream noticed irregular movement. That's fast, Caleb replied. That's Dominic fast, Evan said, which means Vince is about to panic. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. Panic makes noise, Caleb said, and mistakes. I've started duplicating files, Evan added. Encrypted, off-site. If something happens, it won't, Caleb said, then softened. But good. They hung up. Caleb loaded Rook into the truck and drove into town, not to hide, to be seen. The hardware store smelled like oil and sawdust. Caleb picked up supplies he didn't strictly need. Rope, duct tape, a new padlock items that told anyone watching that he was staying put. Near the register stood a man Caleb didn't recognize. He was mid-40s, tall and lean, his gray hair combed neatly back. He wore a dark wool coat and leather gloves that had never seen real work. His face was narrow, clean-shaven, eyes sharp in a way that suggested careful listening rather than curiosity. When Caleb passed, the man met his gaze and inclined his head slightly. Not friendly, not hostile, measured. Rook slowed, watching him. The man's eyes flicked to the dog, then away. Outside, Caleb paused by the truck, pretending to adjust the straps in the bed. The man exited moments later. Mr. Maddox, the man said calmly. A word. Caleb turned. Yes? The man offered a hand. Leonard Hale. I represent parties who prefer things resolved quietly. His handshake was firm but brief. His skin was warm despite the cold. Do I know your parties? Caleb asked. Hale smiled thinly. Indirectly. Rook stepped closer to Caleb's leg, not blocking, observing. Hale noticed. He always noticed. Mr. Maddox, Hale continued, you've found yourself adjacent to a situation that doesn't benefit from escalation. I didn't escalate, Caleb said. I intervened. Hale nodded. A matter of perspective. And yours? Caleb asked. That peace is cheaper than conflict, Hale replied. And that Mr. Vassallo prefers clean ledgers and quiet towns. So do I, Caleb said. Hale studied him. Then perhaps you'd consider stepping back, Hale said, letting this matter conclude without further involvement. Caleb smiled faintly. I don't step back from people being hunted, he said, and I don't bargain with men who mistake silence for consent. Hale's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes tightened. I had to ask, he said. Good day. He walked away without another word. Rook watched him go, then sneezed sharply. Caleb exhaled. So, he murmured, that's the other shoe. By afternoon, the town felt different, not hostile, aware. People glanced a beat too long. Conversations dipped when Caleb entered a room. The news traveled fast in small places, even when no one admitted it. At the bar, Hannah was off shift, sitting at a corner table with Renee, the bartender. Renee looked as she always did. Short hair, flannel shirt, eyes that missed nothing. You should leave town, Renee said bluntly when Caleb approached. Both of you. Hannah stared into her coffee. I can't, Hannah said. My mom's meds. I know, Renee said gently. I'm just saying what I do. Caleb pulled out a chair. He came by again? He asked. Hannah nodded. Didn't speak, just left something. She slid a napkin across the table. On it, written in black ink, "Every road leads somewhere." Caleb folded the napkin and pocketed it. Renee watched him carefully. "You sure you know what you're doing, soldier?" Caleb met her gaze. "I know when lines are being crossed," he said, "and I know when standing still makes it worse." Renee sighed. "Damn shame. World keeps making heroes out of people who didn't ask." As they stood to leave, Rook suddenly stopped at the door. He turned not toward the street, but toward the ceiling. His ears flattened, his body tensed. Caleb followed his gaze upward. A faint clicking sound came from above the doorframe. Too soft to notice. Too precise to be accidental. Caleb reached up and pulled down a small black device, no bigger than a coin. A listening bug. The bar went silent. Someone had been listening to everything. Detective Mara Sloan arrived within minutes. She examined the device with a tight jaw. "That's not local hardware," she said. "Someone brought this in." Renee crossed her arms. "So now what?" Mara met Caleb's eyes. "Now it's official." Hannah's face went pale. Mara softened her tone. "You're not in trouble," she said. "But you're not invisible anymore either." Caleb nodded. "I know." That night, Caleb didn't return to the cabin immediately. He drove the long way around the lake, headlights cutting through darkness, Rook alert in the back seat. He stopped twice, doubled back once, confirmed he wasn't being followed. Only then did he head home. Inside, he sat at the table and laid everything out: the napkin, the photo he suspected had been taken, the device. Patterns formed. Someone wanted leverage, not blood, not yet. His phone buzzed again. Evan. "He contacted you, didn't he?" Evan asked. "Yes." "Leonard Hale?" "Yes." Evan cursed softly. "That means Dominic's cleaning house. Vince is cornered." "Cornered men bite," Caleb said. "Or they grab hostages," Evan replied. Silence stretched between them. "Protect Hannah," Evan said finally. Caleb looked at Rook, who had positioned himself between Caleb and the door without being told. "I already am," Caleb said. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the sound of ice shifting on the lake, a deep, distant groan, like the earth adjusting its weight. Something was about to break. The only question was who would be standing when it did. Snow fell in a thin, disciplined line that morning, the kind that didn't announce itself until it had already changed the shape of things. Caleb Maddox watched it from the kitchen window while tightening the strap on his watch. The old military piece ticked steadily, a sound he trusted. Rook sat beside him, black and gold coat catching the pale light, ears angled not toward the weather, but toward the world beyond it. They were not being followed. That, Caleb knew, didn't mean they were alone. The listening device found at the bar had changed the rules. It hadn't escalated violence. It had clarified intent. Someone wanted information, leverage, patience. Someone with resources. Caleb poured coffee, then didn't drink it. Instead, he pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed Evan. "Morning," Evan answered, voice rough with lack of sleep. "Tell me you found something," Caleb said. A pause, then a breath. "I did," Evan said. "Enough to matter." Evan's temporary office smelled like printer ink and stale heat. The building was old, brick walls thick enough to muffle sound, which was why Evan had chosen it. He stood by a whiteboard crowded with arrows, account numbers, and names written in tight, careful script. Evan Mercer looked different today, not just tired, hollowed. He was tall, lean, dressed in the same neutral layers he always wore, but the sharpness in his eyes had dulled into something heavier, the kind of weight that came from seeing too much and knowing you couldn't unsee it. I followed the shell companies backward, Evan said, tapping the board. Instead of asking where the money went, I asked where it paused. Caleb leaned against the desk, arms crossed. Vince likes to skim small, Evan continued. Keeps it under thresholds that trigger alarms. But he got greedy. He started using a personal intermediary. Who? Caleb asked. Evan circled a name, Marcus Ellery. Late 40s, Evan said. Former logistics consultant. Burned out of a real firm 5 years ago. Now he does private coordination. Caleb nodded slowly. Courier. Cleaner, Evan corrected. Moves funds, data, favors, doesn't ask questions, doesn't like attention. Rook, lying by the door, lifted his head at the sound of the name. Evan noticed. He always do that? When it matters, Caleb said. Evan swallowed. Ellery's been meeting Vince twice a week. Same place. Same time. Caleb straightened. Where? Evan hesitated. That's the problem. The marina sat quiet in winter, boats wrapped and sleeping like old animals. The office near the docks belonged to Janice Holt, the harbor master, a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair cut blunt at the chin and skin toughened by decades of wind. Janice was tall, broad-shouldered, and spoke like someone who had learned long ago that politeness wasted breath. Dock cameras work, she said flatly when Caleb explained what he needed. But they don't work for free. Caleb met her gaze. I'm not asking for favors, he said. Janice studied him, eyes narrowing, not in suspicion, but in assessment. You military? She asked. Used to be. She nodded once. Figures. You stand like someone who expects the ground to give way. She handed him a key card. You've got 15 minutes, she said. You didn't get this from me. Thank you, Caleb said. She snorted. Don't thank me. Just make sure whoever's making my docks nervous stops. Rook followed Caleb into the office, nails clicking softly on the floor. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. 2 men. Vince Calder, recognizable, even hunched against the cold bomber jacket zipped to his chin. And the other, Marcus Ellery. Ellery was thin, slightly stooped, his hair a pale brown receding at the temples. He wore a long gray coat and gloves despite the cold, his movements precise, economical. A man who disliked waste in time or words. They met, spoke briefly, exchanged a small package. Ellery glanced up at the camera once, directly. Caleb felt a prickle crawl up his spine. He knows, Evan said quietly. Caleb nodded. Or he suspects. They copied the footage, encrypted it twice, stored it in 3 places. Proof. Not enough to end things, but enough to tilt the table. That evening, Caleb drove Hannah home. It wasn't something they discussed. It had simply become necessary. Hannah's apartment was small, 2nd floor, above a closed bakery. The stairwell smelled faintly of old sugar and dust. Hannah unlocked the door quickly, shoulders tense until she was inside. Do you want tea? She asked. Yes, Caleb said. Please. Her kitchen was clean but sparse. A single photo sat on the counter. Hannah with an older woman, her mother, both smiling into a sun too warm for Minnesota. He left something again, Hannah said quietly, pulling a folded paper from her pocket. This one wasn't a note. It was a receipt. Gas station. Rural highway. Time stamped 2 hours earlier. Caleb's jaw tightened. He wants you to know he can be anywhere, Caleb said. Hannah nodded, eyes bright but dry. I'm tired of being afraid. Caleb met her gaze. Then let us help you stop being alone. She swallowed. I don't want anyone hurt. That's not up to you, Caleb said gently, but keeping you safe is. Rook, sitting near the door, rose and walked over to Hannah. He sat at her feet and looked up, head tilted slightly. She hesitated, then reached out and rested her hand on his head. Rook leaned into the touch. Hannah let out a breath she'd been holding for weeks. Rook suddenly froze. Not alert, not tense. Still. His ears flattened, not toward a sound, but toward the absence of one. Caleb felt it too. A wrongness pressing in. He moved to the window and parted the curtain just enough to see. Across the street, a car sat idling with its lights off. Engine running, no one inside. Waiting. Caleb closed the curtain. Pack a bag, he said calmly. Just essentials. Hannah stared at him. Are you serious? Yes. Where would I go? Caleb thought of the marina footage, the receipt, the lawyer, the bug. Somewhere Vince can't reach tonight, he said. They moved quickly. Hannah grabbed clothes, documents, medication. Caleb checked the stairwell, the street, the corners. The car across the road pulled away just as they exited. They drove without speaking. Rook watched the mirrors. Evan met them at a short-term rental on the edge of town. A plain house, rented under a corporate alias Evan used for work. It wasn't comfortable, but it was anonymous. This is temporary, Evan said, handing Hannah a set of keys. Just until things settle. Hannah looked between the two men. I don't know how to thank you, she said. Don't, Evan replied. Just stay inside. She nodded. When they stepped back outside, the night felt heavier. We crossed a line tonight, Evan said. No, Caleb replied. We acknowledged it. They stood in silence for a moment. Ellery won't like being recorded, Evan said, and Vince won't like being cut off. Caleb looked toward the dark road. Cornered men, he said, don't negotiate. Rook moved to stand between them and the street, body angled just so. Caleb placed a hand on his shoulder. Tomorrow, Caleb said, we make sure the proof reaches the right ears. Evan nodded. And tonight? Evan asked. Caleb looked at the dark, the quiet, the waiting. Tonight, he said, we don't blink. Night tightened its grip on the town like a careful hand. Not sudden, not loud, just firm. Caleb Maddox felt it as he stood on the porch of the short-term rental, the cold seeping through his boots, the sky a hard bowl of stars. Inside, the lights were low. Hannah slept on the couch with a jacket folded beneath her head. Evan sat at the small kitchen table, laptop closed, hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold. Rook stood at the edge of the porch, body angled toward the road, still, listening. Nothing's moving, Evan said quietly. Something is, Caleb replied, just not where we expect it. He stepped inside and locked the door. They had done everything right, kept Hannah hidden, split the evidence into redundant paths, avoided predictable routes. And yet the pressure hadn't lifted. It had simply changed shape, like water finding a new crack. Evan rubbed his face. Ellery hasn't shown up since the marina, he said. Vince's accounts are still frozen, but not seized. Dominic's people are circling, not striking. Caleb nodded. That means they're weighing outcomes. And us? We're variables. Rook moved from the door to the hallway. then stopped. He turned his head slightly, ears tilting toward the back of the house. Caleb followed. Nothing obvious, no sound, no shadow. But Rook didn't move on. "Copy that," Caleb murmured. "We'll stay alert." Morning arrived with brittle light and a sky the color of clean steel. Caleb drove Hannah to a nearby clinic under an assumed appointment Evan had arranged. It wasn't treatment she needed. It was presence. Places with people. Cameras. Witnesses. The clinic lobby was warm and smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. A woman at the front desk looked up. She was in her early 50s, tall and spare, with iron gray hair pulled into a neat bun. Her posture was precise, almost military. Her eyes were kind, but assessing, as if kindness were something she offered deliberately. "Good morning," she said. "Name?" Evan had prepared the alias. The paperwork slid across smoothly. The woman nodded and handed them a clipboard. "Dr. Elaine Porter," she said, extending a hand. "I'll be seeing you today." Hannah's shoulders eased a fraction. Dr. Porter noticed. "You're safe here," she said gently. "Whatever brings you in." Hannah swallowed and nodded. Caleb waited outside the exam room with Rook. Back to the wall, eyes on the corridor. Nurses passed. Phones rang. Life continued at a human pace. When Hannah emerged, her face looked lighter. Not healed, but steadier. "Thank you," Hannah said to Dr. Porter. The doctor's gaze shifted to Caleb and Rook. "You don't look like family," Dr. Porter said calmly, "but you look like protection." Caleb inclined his head. "We try." Dr. Porter studied Rook for a moment. "Animals know," she said. "They always do." Then she returned to her work without ceremony. Outside, Caleb felt the air change. Rook had stopped walking. Caleb glanced down. The dog's body was rigid, not aggressive, not alarmed. Focused. Across the parking lot, a man leaned against a sedan, phone in hand. He was broad-shouldered, early 30s, with close-cropped hair and a thick beard that framed a jaw set too tight. He wore a work jacket and boots that had never seen real labor. His eyes were wrong, too attentive, too deliberate. When Caleb looked at him, the man smiled. Then he turned and walked away. Hannah didn't notice, but Caleb did. By afternoon, Evan had confirmed what Caleb already suspected. "They're setting a corridor," Evan said over the phone. "Not chasing, steering." "To where?" Caleb asked. Evan hesitated. "Someplace isolated, somewhere they can control." Caleb thought of the long county road that skirted the lake, winding into forest, and nothing else. "The narrow bridge," Caleb said. Evan exhaled. "That's what I was afraid you'd say. They didn't wait for night." Caleb drove with Hannah in the passenger seat, Evan following in a second car. Rook rode in the back, eyes fixed forward. The narrow bridge lay ahead, an old steel span crossing a frozen tributary, rusted but functional. Trees crowded close on both sides, branches arching overhead like ribs. Caleb slowed. The road was empty, too empty. Rook stood, bracing. Caleb's pulse stayed steady. "Seatbelt," he said calmly. Hannah obeyed. As they reached the midpoint of the bridge, headlights flared behind them. Then ahead, blocked. Caleb stopped the truck. "Stay inside," he told Hannah, "no matter what." Before she could respond, a door slammed. Vince Calder stepped into the road. Up close, He was shorter than he seemed in the bar, his bulk coming more from attitude than mass. His bomber jacket hung open, his hands bare despite the cold. His smile was sharp with satisfaction. "Took you long enough," Vince said. Caleb opened his door and stepped out. Rook followed, placing himself slightly ahead of Caleb's legs. Vince noticed the dog and scoffed. "Cute." Behind Vince, two men moved into position. One held a crowbar. The other kept his hands in his pockets. "Get back in the truck," Vince said to Hannah. "We're going for a ride." "No," Caleb said. Vince laughed. "You really think this ends well for you?" Caleb met his gaze. "I think you've made a mistake," he said. Vince's eyes flicked past Caleb to Evan's car, pulling up behind, then to the trees. Something shifted. Before Vince could speak again, engines roared from both sides of the bridge. Black SUVs surged forward, hemming the scene in tight. Doors opened. Men in dark coats moved with purpose, not haste. At their center walked Leonard Hale, immaculate as ever. Calm, controlled. Vince froze. Hale's voice carried easily in the cold. "Vincent," Hale said, "this isn't how we discussed resolving your situation." Vince's mouth opened, closed. "You lied," Hale continued. "You skimmed, you panicked, and now you're loud." Dominic Vassallo didn't appear. He didn't need to. Hale gestured once. The men behind him moved. Vince tried to back away, crowbar lifting. Rook lunged, not to attack, to intercept. The dog struck Vince's arm mid-motion, jaws clamping onto the sleeve, wrenching it aside. The crowbar clattered to the asphalt. Caleb moved in the same instant, twisting Vince's arm behind his back and forcing him to his knees. The bridge rang with the sound. Vince screamed rage more than pain. Hale watched, expression unreadable. "This was your last chance," Hale said quietly. "Congratulations." The men hauled Vince to his feet and dragged him away. Hale turned to Caleb. "Mr. Maddox," he said. "Mr. Mercer." Evan stepped forward. "You keep your people away from her," Evan said evenly. "And this ends?" Hale nodded once. "It already has." He glanced at Rook, who stood between Caleb and Hannah's door, chest rising and falling steadily. "Impressive animal," Hale said. "He's family," Caleb replied. Hale inclined his head and turned away. The SUVs withdrew as quickly as they had arrived. The bridge fell silent. As the last engine faded, Rook did something unexpected. He walked to the edge of the bridge and sat, staring down at the frozen water below. Not alert. Not guarding. Waiting. Caleb felt it then. Not danger, but release. As if something long coiled had finally let go. They drove back in silence. At the rental house, Hannah climbed out and turned to Caleb, her hands trembling now that the moment had passed. "It's over?" she asked. Caleb met her eyes. "For you," he said. "Yes." She nodded, tears finally breaking free. Evan placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe." Inside, Rook lay down by the door, head on his paws, eyes half-lidded. Caleb sat beside him and rested a hand on the dog's neck. "Good work," he murmured. Rook's tail thumped once. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, no longer pressing, just passing. The narrow bridge behind them stood empty again. But it would remember. Morning returned without asking permission. It slipped over the lake in pale layers of silver and blue, softening the hard lines the night had carved into the world. The bridge was miles away now, already returning to its old purpose of holding weight and letting it pass. No sirens, no rumors, just ice creaking and wind moving through pine needles like breath through ribs. Caleb Maddox stood on the porch of his cabin with a mug of coffee warming his hands. The steam rose and vanished. He watched it the way he watched everything long enough to understand its shape, not long enough to cling. Rook lay at his feet, stretched out on the boards, head resting on his paws. The German shepherd's coat caught the light in bands of black and gold, each breath slow and even. He looked older this morning, Caleb thought. Not in years, but in purpose. As if a door had closed behind them, and something heavy had been set down. Inside the cabin, the phone rang. Caleb didn't rush it. When he answered, Evan Mercer's voice came through steady, relieved. "It's done," Evan said. "Formally." Caleb leaned against the railing. "Define done." "Vince won't be coming back," Evan replied. "Dominic's people handed over enough to make it clean. The right charges, the right sequence, no loose ends." Caleb closed his eyes for a moment. "And Hannah?" he asked. "She's clear," Evan said. "No flags, no shadows. Mara confirmed it. The paperwork's moving." "Good," Caleb said. They hung up without ceremony. That was how things ended when you were lucky without speeches. Caleb took another sip of coffee. Rook lifted his head and glanced toward the road. A car approached slowly, tires crunching over the gravel. Caleb set the mug down. The car stopped at the edge of the drive. A woman stepped out, followed by a younger man. The woman was in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, her hair dark with strands of silver pulled into a low knot. She wore a thick coat and sensible boots, her posture straight, with the stubbornness of someone who had carried too much and refused to bend. Her eyes were Hannah's. The young man beside her, early 20s, lanky, nervous, kept his hands in his pockets, scanning the trees as if expecting the woods to answer back. Hannah climbed out last. She looked different, lighter somehow. Not because the fear had vanished, it hadn't, but because it no longer owned her shoulders. Her hair was loose today, falling in soft waves around her face. She wore a borrowed jacket that didn't quite fit but held warmth all the same. Rook rose to his feet. He didn't bark. He walked forward, tail level, and stopped a few feet from Hannah's mother. He sat, posture respectful, eyes gentle. The woman inhaled sharply. "You must be him," she said softly, her voice thick. "The dog." Rook tilted his head. Caleb stepped down from the porch. "Hannah," he said. She smiled, then crossed the space between them and hugged him. It was brief and fierce, the way people hug when words won't do the work. "This is my mom," Hannah said, stepping back, "and my brother Luke." Caleb nodded to them both. "Thank you," Hannah's mother said. Her voice trembled now. "I didn't know who else to thank." Caleb shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." She looked at him, really looked and seemed to understand. They went inside. The cabin filled with quiet voices and the smell of fresh coffee. Luke hovered near the window, curiosity warring with nerves. Hannah's mother sat at the small table, hands wrapped around her mug as if grounding herself. "I kept telling her to quit," she said, "to leave. But life doesn't always give you clean exits." Caleb nodded. "No, ma'am, it doesn't." Rook lay down near Hannah's chair, close enough that she could rest her foot against his flank. She did, unconsciously, and smiled when she realized it. After a while, Hannah's mother stood. We won't stay long, she said. We're heading south. New start. That's good, Caleb said. She hesitated, then reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It's not much, she said, but I wanted you to have it. Caleb unfolded it, a photograph. Hannah as a child, maybe 8 years old, laughing in sunlight, too bright to belong to this state. Her arm around a dog, an old mutt with graying fur and eyes full of mischief. He used to walk her to school, her mother said. Wouldn't let anyone near her. Guess some things come back around. Caleb looked at Rook. The dog's tail thumped once. They left shortly after, the car disappearing down the road until it became nothing but movement among trees. The cabin felt larger in their absence. That afternoon, Detective Mara Sloan stopped by. She didn't bring a badge. She didn't bring questions. She brought a paper bag with 2 sandwiches and set them on the table. Figured you hadn't eaten, she said. Caleb arched an eyebrow. That a habit of yours? Mara shrugged. People who do the right thing tend to forget. She glanced at Rook. He looks different. Caleb followed her gaze. Lighter, Mara said, like he finished something. Caleb nodded. We both did. Mara hesitated, then spoke more quietly. This town won't say it out loud, but they noticed. Caleb met her eyes. I didn't do it for the town. I know, Mara said. That's why it matters. She stood, pausing at the door. For what it's worth, she added, if you ever need anything, you won't have to ask twice. Caleb inclined his head. After she left, the quiet returned. Not empty this time, but settled. As the sun dipped low, Rook suddenly lifted his head and stared toward the frozen lake. Not alert, not tense. He rose, walked to the edge of the porch, and sat facing the horizon, ears relaxed, posture open. Caleb joined him, sitting on the step. For a moment, just a moment, Caleb felt the strange, unshakable certainty that something unseen had paused, nodded, and moved on. That evening, Caleb drove into town for the first time without scanning mirrors every few seconds. At the bar, Renee was polishing glasses. She looked up, grinned, and slid a beer down the counter. On the house, she said, for the quiet kind of heroes. Caleb took the glass. I'm not. Yeah, Renee cut in. I know. Drink. At a corner table, Evan raised his glass. To lines, Evan said when Caleb joined him, and to knowing when to cross them. They drank. Outside, the lights glowed warm against the cold. People laughed. Music played. Life, stubborn and ordinary, continued. Later, back at the cabin, Caleb lay on the couch with a book he didn't read. Rook settled beside him, heavy and solid, a presence that asked nothing and offered everything. Caleb stared at the ceiling, thinking of bridges and pressure and the strange geometry of fate. He had spent years believing his purpose ended with service papers and folded flags, that whatever good he had done was already accounted for. He understood now how wrong that was. Some wars didn't announce themselves. Some battles were quiet. And sometimes, the difference between loss and grace came down to a man who refused to look away, and a dog who knew when to stand between. Outside, the lake creaked softly as ice shifted into a new shape. Caleb closed his eyes. For the first time in a long while, sleep came without keeping watch. Sometimes the miracle doesn't arrive as thunder or fire. Sometimes It comes quietly, through a stranger who refuses to look away, through a loyal animal that senses danger before words are spoken, through a moment where God places someone exactly where they are needed. We walk through our daily lives thinking we are alone in our struggles, but faith teaches us this truth. No step is wasted, and no meeting is accidental. God works through ordinary days, ordinary people, and quiet acts of courage. What feels small to us can be life-saving to someone else. If this story touched you, let it be a reminder to listen to your conscience, to that gentle warning in your heart, and to the call to protect, not ignore. Kindness, when chosen at the right moment, becomes a miracle. Please share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us if you have ever felt guided to help when it mattered most. Subscribe to the channel to support stories that honor faith, courage, and unseen grace. May God watch over you and your family. May He place the right people in your path when you need them most. And may His protection follow you wherever you go.